The Atlanta humidity had officially crossed the line from uncomfortable to personal insult. My back was slick with sweat, my hair clung to my forehead like a desperate ex, and the air itself felt like a wet wool blanket. And yet, somehow, Max, my golden retriever, a creature seemingly designed to attract and retain every molecule of Georgia heat, looked remarkably unfazed as he lounged on the porch, tongue lolling out, a picture of canine contentment. "Don't you have some sympathy for your grooming slave, buddy?" I grumbled, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. I just spent the last hour wrestling with Max and my ancient, hand-me-down clippers, giving him his annual summer in the South trim. Okay, maybe trim was an overstatement. It was more of a strategic shearing. He looked less like a majestic golden retriever and more like a slightly lopsided, golden-hued sheepdog who lost a fight with a lawnmower. But hey, at least he was cooler. And frankly, I'd always been of the form-follows-function school of dog grooming. My mother, of course, would disagree. She'd always envisioned Max in perfectly symmetrical, AKC-approved glory. But Mom lived in Boca Raton. She didn't understand the brutal reality of a Chastain Park summer. Max responded to my complaint with a loud, theatrical sigh and thumped his tail a few times against the porch boards. "Oh, you poor, persecuted beast," I said, rolling my eyes. "The trauma of being aesthetically compromised. I feel for you." He lifted his head slightly, giving me a look that clearly communicated, "Treats now. Apologies later." I caved, naturally. I'm a sucker for a well-timed, reproachful doggy stare. I tossed him a milk bone, which he caught in midair with the grace of an Olympic medalist. We continued to bask in the sticky afternoon air, me nursing an iced tea and Max contentedly chewing, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of sensible shoes on the sidewalk. Specifically, sensible shoes attached to a woman on a mission. My heart sank. I knew exactly who it was. Karen. Yes, that Karen. The Hoa president. The woman who probably ironed her recycling. The self-appointed guardian of Chastain Park's pristine aesthetic. The bane of my existence. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, her eyes narrowing behind her oversized sunglasses. She was holding a clipboard, naturally. A clipboard is to Karen what a lightsaber is to a Jedi her weapon of choice. "Good afternoon. Your name," she said, her voice a perfectly modulated blend of disapproval and forced politeness. "Karen," I replied, mustering my most charmingly sarcastic smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Is my mailbox slightly askew again? Did a dandelion dare to bloom on my meticulously curated lawn?" She ignored my jibe. I couldn't help but notice Max's recent grooming. I braced myself. Yes, I gave him a haircut. He was overheating. Unless there's some bylaw against canine comfort, I think I'm in the clear. Karen pursed her lips. It was a maneuver I'd come to recognize as the harbinger of doom. She flipped open her clipboard, revealing a document thicker than a Tolstoy novel. "Actually, your name." Article 18.7c of the Chastain Park Hoa Guidelines clearly states, any alteration to a pet's natural appearance, including but not limited to grooming, dyeing, or the application of decorative accessories, must be submitted to the Architectural Review Board for approval prior to implementation. I stared at her, speechless. "You're kidding, right?" She did not break eye contact, her expression unwavering. "I assure you, I am not. The board takes matters of neighborhood aesthetics very seriously. Untested grooming practices can lead to unpredictable outcomes." "Unpredictable outcomes?" I sputtered. "Karen, I gave my dog a haircut. He didn't suddenly sprout wings and start attacking the local bird population. The potential for visual disruption is the core issue," she said, consulting the document again. "The Hoa is committed to ensuring neighborhood uniformity. Unapproved grooming can create disharmony." I looked at Max, who was now gnawing contentedly on a stick, completely oblivious to his role in this epic battle of wills. He did look a little rough. But disharmony? "So, let me get this straight," I said, carefully controlling my tone. "If I want to give Max a haircut, I have to submit architectural plans? Blueprints of his fur? A detailed explanation of my clipper blade choices? A formal proposal outlining the desired grooming style? A justification for the proposed alteration?" and photographic evidence of comparable grooming styles. And similar architectural environments are required. Forms are available on the Hoa website. My jaw dropped. You're insane. I blurted out before I could stop myself. Karen's face flushed slightly. I am simply upholding the rules. Your name. Rules that you agreed to when you purchased your property. Furthermore, based on this infraction, I'm issuing a formal warning. Continued violations may result in fines. She scribbled something on her clipboard, tore off a sheet, and handed it to me. It was official. A formal warning from the Chastain Park Hoa. I felt a strange mix of outrage and pride. Have a pleasant day. Your name, she said, turning to leave. And perhaps consider consulting a professional groomer next time. We have several excellent establishments listed in the preferred vendors section of the Hoa website. As she walked away, her sensible shoes clicking on the pavement, I looked down at the warning in my hand. It was printed on official Hoa letterhead, complete with a watermark of a perfectly manicured lawn. Oh, this is going to be fun, I muttered, a slow smile spreading across my face. This is going to be very fun. Max, sensing my shift in mood, wagged his tail. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew, somehow, that things were about to get interesting. The next day, I decided to take Max for a walk through Chastain Park itself. I needed to clear my head and formulate a plan. Plus, I figured a little public display of unapproved grooming might be just the thing to rile up the neighborhood gossips. Chastain Park in July is a sensory assault. The air is thick with the scent of magnolia blossoms and freshly cut grass. The sounds of children shrieking with delight at the playground mingle with the drone of lawnmowers. And the heat, the heat, it's a full-body experience. We strolled past perfectly manicured lawns, each a testament to the HOA's iron grip on conformity. I noticed Mrs. Higgins, a sweet elderly woman who lived across the street, watering her prize-winning roses. Her garden was a riot of color, a defiant splash of individuality in a sea of sameness. She caught my eye and gave me a knowing wink. He looks cooler, she said, gesturing to Max. That Karen's gone too far this time. You think so? I asked, feigning surprise. Think so? She told me I couldn't plant petunias because they weren't on the approved flower list. Petunias, for crying out loud. What's next? She'll be telling us what color underwear we're allowed to wear. I chuckled. Don't give her any ideas. We continued our walk, passing the Chastain Park Amphitheater, where the Hoa was hosting its annual summer picnic. The air was filled with the smell of hot dogs and the sounds of awkward small talk. I saw Karen holding court near the buffet table, surrounded by a gaggle of equally immaculately dressed women. She caught my eye and gave me a tight, perfunctory smile. I responded with a jaunty wave and steered Max in her direction. Looking good, Karen, I called out. Loving the power suit. Very architectural. She frowned, but I didn't stick around to hear her retort. I had bigger plans brewing. As we walked away, I overheard snippets of conversation. That dog looks awful. Did you hear what she said to poor Mrs. Higgins about her petunias? She's just power hungry. The seeds of dissent were being sown. I spent the rest of the afternoon plotting. My initial impulse was to fire off a scathing email to the Hoa, filled with sarcastic wit and thinly veiled threats of legal action. But then I thought, no, that was too predictable, too boring. I needed to be more creative, more flamboyant. An idea began to form in my mind, a mischievous little spark that ignited into a full-blown inferno of inspiration. A pet fashion show. Yes, a pet fashion show. A glorious, over-the-top celebration of canine couture, designed to mock the absurdity of the HOA's grooming regulations and expose Karen for the petty tyrant she truly was. I could already picture it, Max, strutting down a makeshift runway in a ridiculous outfit, the crowd roaring with laughter, Karen's face turning a shade of purple usually reserved for eggplants. The only problem was I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. I needed the resistance. That evening, I found myself sitting in a booth at the local diner, the Varsity, with two unlikely accomplices, Mrs. Higgins and Bob, the perpetually grumpy retiree who lived next door. A pet fashion show, Bob grumbled, pushing a half-eaten plate of chili cheese fries away from him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said, taking a sip of my milkshake. "Think about it, Bob. It's the perfect way to stick it to Karen without actually breaking any rules. We'll exploit every loophole, every ambiguity, every vaguely worded clause in the HOA guidelines. And what if she shuts us down, Mrs.?" Higgins asked, her eyes twinkling. "She can try," I said, my voice brimming with confidence. "But I've got a secret weapon. I've discovered that Chastain Park is classified by the City of Atlanta as a designated public gathering space, meaning, with proper permits, we can host events." I paused for dramatic effect. "Even gasp a pet fashion show." Bob remained skeptical. "What about the noise? The traffic? Karen will be all over us." "That's where you come in, Bob," I said, leaning forward. "You're a master of misdirection. You can handle the logistics, the permits, the distractions." Bob sighed. "I haven't had this much excitement since I accidentally set off the neighborhood fire alarm, trying to microwave a burrito." "Exactly," I said. "You're perfect for the job, Mrs." Higgins, meanwhile, was already sketching designs on a napkin. "I've got some ideas for Max's outfit," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "I'm thinking sequins, feathers, maybe even a little tiara." "Hold on," I said, laughing. "Let's not get too carried away. We want to be ridiculous, not Cruella de Vil." "Nonsense, Mrs." Higgins said, waving her hand dismissively. "Go big or go home." We spent the next hour hashing out the details. Mrs. Higgins would design the costumes, Bob would handle the logistics, and I would be in charge of the general chaos. As we left the diner, the air crackled with excitement. We were a ragtag group of rebels, united by our shared disdain for Karen and our unwavering belief in the power of pettiness. Back home, I found Max sprawled out on the living room rug, surrounded by his favorite tennis balls. He looked up at me, his tail wagging expectantly. "Get ready, buddy," I said, ruffling his fur. "We're going to war, and this time, we're bringing the sequins." The battle lines were drawn. The stage was set, and the short for showdown was about to begin. The $150 fine arrived a few days later, nestled in a crisp white envelope, bearing the official seal of the Chastain Park Homeowners Association. It felt less like a monetary penalty and more like a personal declaration of war. I stared at it, my blood pressure slowly rising. $150, I exclaimed to Max, who was, as usual, lounging on the couch like a furry, golden potentate. "For giving you a haircut? That's highway robbery. They could pave a small section of Peachtree Road with that kind of money." Max yawned, unimpressed. He clearly thought his comfort was worth far more than $150. I crumpled the fine in my fist, then smoothed it out and carefully placed it on the kitchen counter. I wasn't going to let it rattle me. I had a pet fashion show to plan. The next morning, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I needed to gauge the neighborhood's mood, assess the level of anti-Karen sentiment, and, most importantly, recruit more rebels. My first stop was Mrs. Higgins' house. Her garden was even more vibrant than I remembered, a kaleidoscope of color that seemed to defy the HOAS sterile uniformity. I found her tending to her roses, humming a jaunty tune. "Morning, Mrs. Higgins," I called out. "How are the Petunia plans coming along?" She straightened up, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Oh, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve," she said, winking. "I'm thinking of planting a whole bed of them under the cover of darkness." "What do you think?" "I think it's brilliant," I said. "A true act of horticultural defiance." She chuckled. "So, how's the fashion show coming?" "We're making progress," I said. "Bob's working on the permits, and I'm trying to drum up some support. Have you heard anything from the neighbors?" "Oh, honey, the whole neighborhood's buzzing," she said. "Everyone's talking about Karen's latest antics. Apparently, she sent a notice to the Millers because their cat, Mr. Whiskers, was caught sunbathing on their porch without an approved sun hat." I burst out laughing. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," she said. "Poor Mr. Whiskers. He's a sensitive soul." I shook my head in disbelief. Karen's reign of terror was escalating. "Well, This is exactly why we need to do this fashion show, I said. We need to show her that we won't stand for this kind of nonsense. Mrs. Higgins nodded enthusiastically. Count me in for anything. I've got a sewing machine and a whole lot of pent-up creative energy. Buoyed by Mrs. Higgins' support, I continue my neighborhood tour. I stopped by the Miller's house to offer my condolences for Mr. Whiskers' sun hat predicament. They were understandably upset. It's just ridiculous, Mrs. Miller said, shaking her head. He's a cat. He doesn't need a sun hat. Tell me about it, I said. Karen's gone completely off the deep end. That's why we're planning a pet fashion show, a protest in the form of a catwalk. The Millers were immediately on board. Mr. Whiskers, despite his aversion to headwear, would be making his runway debut. I spent the rest of the day canvassing the neighborhood, spreading the word about the short for Showdown. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were tired of Karen's arbitrary rules and her constant nitpicking. They were eager to join the rebellion. As I walked home that evening, the air felt lighter. The magnolia blossoms seemed to smell sweeter. We were building momentum. The resistance was growing. The next challenge was securing the necessary permits for the fashion show. This was Bob's area of expertise. He was a retired accountant, a master of paperwork, and a connoisseur of bureaucratic loopholes. He met me at the Varsity, his usual haunt, a steaming mug of coffee already waiting for him. I've been doing some digging, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, and I've discovered something interesting. According to the City of Atlanta's Parks and Recreation Department, Chastain Park is considered a multi-use facility, which means we can apply for a permit to host a community-oriented event. And a pet fashion show qualifies as a community-oriented event? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Technically, yes, Bob said, a sly grin spreading across his face. As long as we frame it as a celebration of pet ownership and responsible animal care. Genius, I said. You're a regular Machiavelli of municipal regulations. Bob chuckled. Don't get too excited. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and there's a chance Karen will try to sabotage us. Let her try, I said. We'll be ready for her. We spent the next few hours filling out forms, writing descriptions, and crafting a carefully worded statement about the fashion show's noble purpose. We emphasized the importance of pet health, responsible breeding, and the joy of animal companionship. We even threw in a line about promoting community harmony. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic doublespeak. Bob submitted the permit application that afternoon. Now, all we had to do was wait, and hope that Karen didn't get wind of our plan. Of course, Karen found out. She always did. I suspected she had a network of spies, a shadowy cabal of Hoa informants who reported on every suspicious activity in the neighborhood. I got the call on Thursday morning. It was Karen, her voice tight with barely suppressed rage. I heard about your fashion show, she said, the word dripping with sarcasm. Oh, yes, I said, trying to sound innocent. It's going to be a wonderful event. A celebration of all things furry and fabulous. I'm sure it is, she said, but I must remind you that any activities within Chastain Park are subject to the approval of the Hoa, and we have not approved this spectacle. Actually, I said, we've applied for a permit from the City of Atlanta. As long as we comply with all the regulations, there's nothing you can do to stop us. There was a long, pregnant pause. I could practically feel the steam coming out of her ears. I'm going to look into this, she said, finally. And if I find any loophole, any technicality, any reason to shut you down, I will. You can count on it. I wouldn't expect anything less, I said, smiling sweetly. She hung up without saying goodbye. The gauntlet had been thrown. The battle was on. Despite Karen's threats, the fashion show preparations continued. Mrs. Higgins was working tirelessly on the costumes, transforming scraps of fabric and bits of trim into miniature masterpieces. Bob was coordinating the logistics, arranging for a sound system, a makeshift runway, and a team of volunteer judges. And I was in charge of keeping Max from eating the costumes. He had a particular fondness for anything made of sequins. The day before the fashion show, I took Max to the Varsity for a pre-show pep talk. We were sitting in our usual booth, surrounded by the comforting aroma of greasy fries and stale coffee. "Okay, buddy," I said, stroking his fur. "Tomorrow's the big day. You need to be on your best behavior. No biting, no barking, and definitely no eating the sequins. Got it?" Max wagged his tail, his eyes fixed on my plate of onion rings. "Focus, Max," I said. "This is important. We're fighting for freedom, for justice, for the right to give our dogs terrible haircuts without being fined into oblivion." Max seemed to understand. He licked my hand and gave me a look of unwavering loyalty. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice. Well, look what we have here." I turned around to see Karen standing behind me, her arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "Having a pre-show strategy session?" she asked. "Just grabbing a bite to eat," I said, trying to sound casual. "You know, carbo loading for the big event." "I'm sure," she said. "I just wanted to let you know that I've been in touch with the City of Atlantis Parks and Recreation Department, and I've discovered a minor discrepancy in your permit application." My heart sank. Apparently, Karen continued, "Your application states that the fashion show will be promoting responsible animal care. However, I have received several complaints from residents who are concerned about the potential for animal cruelty. Dressing up animals in ridiculous costumes and parading them around in the heat is not exactly what I would call responsible." I stared at her, speechless. She was playing dirty. Therefore, Karen said, "I have filed a formal complaint with the City of Atlanta, requesting that your permit be revoked, and I have every confidence that they will agree with me." She smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "See you tomorrow," she said, turning to leave. If there is a tomorrow. I watched her go, my mind racing. Had she just won? Was the short for showdown doomed before it even began? I looked at Max, who was now happily gnawing on a discarded napkin. He seemed blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. "Don't worry, buddy," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We're not going down without a fight. We're going to find a way to pull this off." We have too. The fate of the short for showdown, and perhaps the entire Chastain Park resistance, hung in the balance. The morning of the short for showdown dawned bright and sweltering, the kind of day that made you question all your life choices, especially the one that involved organizing an outdoor event in Atlanta in July. Despite the heat, a buzz of anticipation filled the air. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about Karen's attempt to shut us down, and the community was rallying. I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. What if Karen had succeeded in getting our permit revoked? What if no one showed up? What if Max decided to stage a mid-runway protest in the form of a strategically placed pile of I forced myself to take a deep breath and focus on the task at hand, getting Max into his outfit. Mrs. Higgins had truly outdone herself. Max's ensemble was, well, let's just say it was memorable. A miniature version of Elvis Presley's iconic white jumpsuit, complete with a rhinestone-studded collar and a perfectly coiffed and glued-on pompadour wig. I swear, even Max looked slightly embarrassed. "Don't worry, buddy," I said, struggling to fasten the tiny belt around his waist. "It's only for a few minutes. Think of it as performance art." He responded with a low growl, which I interpreted as either a protest or a surprisingly accurate Elvis impersonation. When we arrived at Chastain Park, I was pleasantly surprised. A small but enthusiastic crowd had gathered near the amphitheater. Bob had managed to set up a makeshift runway using some old wooden pallets and a borrowed red carpet. A sound system was blasting upbeat music, mostly golden oldies and dog-themed pop songs who let the dogs out, naturally. Mrs. Higgins was there, beaming with pride, wearing a floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat. She looked like a Southern belle ready for a garden party, except this garden party involved dogs dressed as famous musicians. Bob, ever the pragmatist, was overseeing the setup, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. He looked stressed but surprisingly energized. I spotted the Millers, nervously adjusting Mr. Whisker's tiny top hat and monocle. The cat, predictably, looked less than thrilled. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be," Bob said, wiping his brow. Just hope Karen doesn't try to pull any more stunts. She wouldn't dare, Mrs. Higgins said, her voice full of confidence. Not with this many people watching. That's when I saw her. Karen, standing at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of disapproval. She was flanked by two other HOA members, both equally stern-faced and clipboard-wielding. The Karen Armada had arrived. I squared my shoulders and walked towards her, Max trotting dutifully at my side. "Good morning, Karen," I said, forcing a smile. "So glad you could make it. I hope you're ready for a fashion extravaganza." "I'm here to ensure that everything is in compliance with the city ordinances," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "And I must say, I have serious concerns about the safety and well-being of these animals." "We've taken every precaution," I said. "We have water bowls, shade tents, and a veterinarian on standby. We're all about responsible pet ownership here." Karen snorted. "I highly doubt that." Just then, the music started to swell, and Bob announced the beginning of the short for Showdown. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats, welcome to the most fabulous, most fantastic, most utterly ridiculous event in Chastain Park history. Let the show begin." The crowd roared with applause. The first contestant was a fluffy white poodle named Coco, dressed as Marie Antoinette, complete with a towering wig and a tiny powdered face. The crowd went wild. Next up was Mr. Whiskers, looking utterly miserable but undeniably dapper in his top hat and monocle. The Millers gently guided him down the runway, and he promptly sat down and started licking his fur. Then came Max, the grand finale. As we strutted down the runway, the crowd went berserk. People were cheering, laughing, and taking pictures. Max, surprisingly, seemed to be enjoying the attention. He even managed a passable Elvis lip curl. I saw Karen's face turn a shade of purple that I didn't think was humanly possible. She was clearly losing control. As Max and I reached the end of the runway, I grabbed the microphone. Thank you very much," I said, channeling my inner Elvis. "But this show isn't just about sequins and silly costumes. It's about freedom. It's about standing up to bullies. It's about fighting for the right to be a little bit ridiculous." I paused for effect. And that, my friends, is what makes Chastain Park so special. We're a community that values individuality, creativity, and a good sense of humor. We won't let anyone, not even the HOA, take that away from us. The crowd erupted in applause. That's when I played my trump card. "And now," I said, "I'd like to introduce a very special guest, Mr. Bartholomew Higgins, a representative from the City of Atlanta's Parks and Recreation Department." Bob stepped forward, looking slightly bewildered but game for anything. "Mr. Higgins has been kind enough to review our permit application and confirm that we are, in fact, in full compliance with all city ordinances." Bob nodded, holding up a piece of paper. "That's right," he said, his voice surprisingly authoritative. "This event is fully sanctioned by the City of Atlanta. We encourage everyone to enjoy the show and celebrate the wonderful spirit of community. That makes Chastain Park so special." Karen's jaw dropped. She had been outmaneuvered. But this is outrageous," she sputtered. "You can't just flaunt the whole rules like this." "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with sweetness, "we can. Because as long as we're in compliance with the city ordinances, the HOAS rules don't apply." I paused for dramatic effect. And that, my friends, is why this event is being held in Chastain Park, not on private property. The crowd went wild. They were chanting, cheering, and generally making a joyful ruckus. Karen, realizing that she had lost, turned on her heel and stormed away, her Tahoe minions trailing behind her. The short for Showdown was a resounding success. We had proven that we could stand up to Karen and her ridiculous rules. We had shown that the community was united against her tyranny, and we had done it all while dressing dogs in ridiculous costumes. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of laughter, applause, and general merriment. People were dancing, eating hot dogs, and taking pictures with the dogs. Even Mr. Whiskers seemed to be enjoying himself, although he still refused to wear the top hat. As the sun began to set, I surveyed the scene with a sense of satisfaction. We had pulled it off. We had organized a successful event, defied the Hoa, and brought the community together. But I knew that this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't going to give up easily. She would be back, and she would be looking for revenge. I just hoped we were ready for her. As I packed up for the night, Bob came over to me, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "Well, we did it," he said. "We actually pulled it off." "We did," I said, "and it was glorious." Mrs. Higgins joined us, her eyes sparkling. "That was the most fun I've had in years," she said. "We really showed her, didn't we?" "We did," I said. "But this is just the beginning. We need to be ready for her next move." "Don't worry," Bob said. "We'll be ready. We're a force to be reckoned with now." As we walked back to our houses, the air was filled with a sense of camaraderie and defiance. We had tasted victory, and we were hungry for more. "Karen, beware. The Chastain Park rebellion has begun." The dust had barely settled from the short for showdown when Karen launched her counteroffensive. It was swift, ruthless, and surprisingly well orchestrated. I had underestimated her. I had assumed that her power was solely based on her position as Hoa president, but I was wrong. Karen had connections. Karen had resources. And Karen had a vendetta. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a barrage of new HOA regulations. Seemingly overnight, the guidelines were updated with a slew of draconian measures, all subtly and not so subtly targeting pet owners. Article 18.7c, the grooming regulation, was still in effect, but now it was joined by a host of new clauses, restrictions on dog walking hours, limitations on the size and breed of permissible pets, and a complete ban on excessive barking defined as any vocalization deemed disruptive. By a panel of 3 randomly selected Hoa members, it was clear that Karen was trying to make life as miserable as possible for anyone who had dared to defy her. I received another formal notice in the mail, this time accusing me of violating the excessive barking clause. Apparently, Max's enthusiastic greetings to the mailman constituted disruptive vocalization. The fine, $250. I crumpled the notice in my fist, my anger simmering. This was getting ridiculous. "She's declared war, Max," I said, glaring at my golden companion. "And we're going to fight back." But this time, I knew we needed a more strategic approach. The fashion show had been a fun and effective way to embarrass Karen, but it wasn't a long-term solution. We needed to change the rules themselves. The media attention from the short for showdown added another layer of complexity. The local news had picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between a plucky homeowner and a tyrannical Hoa. We were getting calls from reporters, bloggers, and even a producer from a national morning show. While the publicity was generally positive, it also had some drawbacks. Karen was now under intense scrutiny, and she was doubling down on her efforts to prove that she was in the right. The whole website was flooded with statements defending their regulations and accusing us of creating a hostile environment in the neighborhood. I spent the afternoon in Mrs. Higgins' backyard, strategizing with Bob and the Millers. We were sitting around a rickety picnic table, sipping iced tea and swatting at mosquitoes. Max, meanwhile, was gnawing on a tennis ball under a shady oak tree. "We need to go on the offensive," I said, pacing back and forth. "We need to challenge these regulations directly. We need to start a petition," Mrs. Miller suggested, her eyes gleaming. "We can gather signatures from the neighbors and present it to the HOA. We can demand that they repeal Article 18.7c and all these other ridiculous rules." "That's brilliant," I said. "A petition is exactly what we need. It's a formal, organized way to express our dissent." Bob, ever the pragmatist, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Do you really think it will work? Karen's not going to back down easily." "Maybe not," I said, "but it's worth a try. We need to show her that we're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to be silenced." And so, the petition was born. I spent the evening drafting a carefully worded document, outlining our grievances and demanding that the Hoa rescind the offending regulations. I focused on the absurdity of the pet grooming rule and the violation of homeowners' rights. The next morning, I printed out dozens of copies and set out to collect signatures. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were eager to sign, eager to voice their frustration with the HOAS overreach. Even some of the more conservative residents, who had initially been skeptical of the fashion show, were now willing to lend their support. Karen's heavy-handed tactics had backfired, turning even her allies against her. As I walked from house to house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. We were building a movement, a grassroots rebellion against tyranny, and we were doing it one signature at a time. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah, a young mother who lived down the street. She had been hesitant to get involved in the fashion show, but she had signed our petition with enthusiasm. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "You're doing something really important. Karen's been making our lives miserable for years. She's always finding something to complain about. The color of our front door, the height of our grass, the toys in our front yard." "I know exactly what you mean," I said, nodding sympathetically. "I was afraid to speak out," she said. "I didn't want to make things worse. But you've given me courage. You've shown me that it's okay to stand up for what you believe in." I smiled. "We're all in this together," I said. "We're not going to let Karen bully us anymore." Sarah smiled back. "I'm with you," she said. "Whatever you need, just let me know." As she walked away, I realized that our rebellion was about more than just pet grooming regulations. It was about reclaiming our community, about standing up for our rights, about creating a neighborhood where everyone felt welcome and respected. The next few days were a whirlwind of petitioning, media interviews, and strategy sessions. The news coverage of the Chastain Park Rebellion had gone viral, attracting attention from all over the country. We were getting calls from activists, lawyers, and even celebrities who wanted to lend their support. Karen, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly isolated. Her attempts to defend the HOAS regulations were met with ridicule and scorn. Even her closest allies were starting to distance themselves from her. I saw her one afternoon, walking her perfectly groomed poodle down the street. She looked tired, defeated, and utterly miserable. I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. She had clearly lost control of the situation, but I quickly pushed the sympathy aside. She had brought this on herself. She had abused her power, and she was now paying the price. That evening, as I sat on my porch swing, watching Max chase fireflies in the twilight, I received a phone call from Bob. "I have some good news," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "The Hoe has agreed to meet with us to discuss the petition. They've scheduled a meeting for next week." "That's fantastic," I said. "They're finally listening to us." "Don't get too excited," Bob said. "They're probably just trying to appease us. But it's a start. It's a foot in the door." "I know," I said, "but it's a sign that we're making progress. We're wearing them down." "Just be prepared for a fight," Bob said. "Karen's not going to give up without a struggle." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I said. "We're ready for her. We're not going to back down." The battle for Chastain Park was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. We had a chance to win. We had a chance to reclaim our community, and we weren't going to let it slip away. The whole meeting was held in the Chastain Park Community Center, a sterile, beige room that felt more like a dentist's office than a gathering place for neighbors. The air was thick with tension, palpable enough to cut with a butter knife. The entire neighborhood seemed to be there. Residents packed the room, spilling out into the hallway. Bob, ever the organized one, had set up a sign-in sheet and a designated area for speakers. Mrs. Higgins was handing out protest signs she'd crafted, each one more outrageous than the last. "Grooming is freedom. Hands off our hairs. Let my poodle be poodle." I saw Sarah, the young mother, standing near the back, holding a sign that read, "My lawn, my rules." It was a small thing, but it gave me a surge of hope. We were united. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her usual Hoe minions. She looked pale and drawn, but her eyes still held a glint of defiance. She surveyed the crowd with a mixture of apprehension and disdain. The meeting began with the usual formalities, approval of the minutes, financial reports, and a lengthy discussion about the proper placement of Christmas lights. I swear, Karen could find something to complain about even during the holidays. Finally, it was time to address the petition. Karen cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "Ms., your last name," she said, her voice cold and formal. "You have presented a petition to the HOA demanding the repeal of Article 18, 7C, and other related regulations. The board has reviewed your petition and considered the concerns of the residents. We have reached a decision." The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Karen paused for dramatic effect. After careful deliberation, the board has decided to. She trailed off, her eyes scanning the crowd. My heart pounded in my chest. What was she going to say? "Suspend Article 18.7C, she finally announced. "Effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a thunderous roar of applause. People were cheering, hugging, and high-fiving. The atmosphere was electric. I couldn't believe it. We had actually won. I looked at Karen, expecting to see a look of defeat on her face. But she was smiling, a small, enigmatic smile. However, she continued, raising her voice to be heard over the applause. "This suspension is contingent upon a thorough review of the whole guidelines and the implementation of new regulations to address the concerns raised by the petition. We will be forming a committee to study the matter and make recommendations for future action." I frowned. Something didn't feel right. Karen wasn't giving up. She was simply regrouping. The meeting continued with a lengthy discussion about the formation of the committee and the scope of its investigation. I volunteered to serve on the committee, along with Bob and Mrs. Higgins. We wanted to make sure that our voices were heard. As the meeting adjourned, the crowd spilled out into the parking lot, buzzing with excitement. It felt like a victory celebration. We had won a battle, but the war was far from over. That evening, the neighborhood threw a block party to celebrate the suspension of Article 18.7C. Tables were set up in the middle of the street, laden with food and drinks. Music was blasting from someone's porch. Children were running around, laughing and playing. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated joy. I saw Sarah, the young mother, dancing with her children. She caught my eye and gave me a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've changed everything." I smiled back. "We did it together," I said. "We all stood up for what we believed in." Max, meanwhile, was enjoying the attention. He was surrounded by children, all eager to pet him and scratch his ears. He was in his element. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was planning something. I had seen that look in her eyes. She wasn't defeated. She was simply biding her time. I went home early, feeling a sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, trying to decipher Karen's strategy. Finally, I got up and went downstairs. I poured myself a glass of milk and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. That's when I saw her, Karen, standing in her backyard, under the glow of a security light. She was holding a clipboard and scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. I watched her for a few minutes, my curiosity piqued. What was she up to? Then, I realized what she was doing. She was drafting a new regulation. I couldn't make out the specifics, but I could see the determined look on her face. She was plotting her revenge. I felt a chill run down my spine. The battle for Chastain Park was about to enter a new phase. The next morning, I received a notice in the mail. It was from the HOA. The subject, proposed amendment to Article 19. To be regulation of pet attire. I opened the notice and read the proposed amendment. It was even more ridiculous than I could have imagined. All pet attire, it read, must adhere to a pre-approved color palette. The color palette will consist of muted, neutral tones, designed to complement the natural landscape and architectural aesthetic of Chastain Park. Bright colors, bold patterns, and excessive ornamentation are strictly prohibited. I burst out laughing. Karen was insane. But then, I realized that this was no laughing matter. This was a direct attack on our newfound freedom. This was Karen's way of telling us that she was still in control. I looked at Max, who was sprawled out on the living room rug, wearing his rhinestone-studded collar. He looked happy, content, and utterly fabulous. "Don't worry, buddy," I said, a mischievous glint in my eyes. "We're not going to let her get away with this. We're going to fight back. We're going to show her that we're not afraid of a little color." I paused for effect. "We're going to have a pet rainbow rally." Max wagged his tail, sensing that something exciting was about to happen. The battle for Chastain Park was far from over. It had just begun. The muggy Atlanta morning seemed to mock us with its cheerful sunshine. It was the kind of oppressive heat that sapped your energy before you even left the house. But we had a rainbow rally to plan, and oppressive heat wasn't going to stop us. The news of Karen's muted color palette regulation had spread like wildfire. Through the neighborhood, people were outraged. It was one thing to ban outrageous costumes, but to dictate the color of our pets' attire? That was a bridge too far. Mrs. Higgins was in her element. She had transformed her backyard into a riot of color, dyeing fabrics, bedazzling collars, and creating the most outlandish pet accessories imaginable. Bob, ever the pragmatist, was coordinating the logistics, securing a permit for our peaceful demonstration again, and ensuring that we had enough water and shade for the animals. And I was in charge of, well, wrangling Max and trying to convince him that wearing a rainbow-colored tutu was a sign of rebellion, not a personal affront. "Look, buddy," I said, wrestling with the tutu, "it's for a good cause. It's about freedom. It's about standing up to tyranny. And besides, you look fabulous." Max responded with a theatrical sigh and a doleful look. He was clearly not convinced. The morning of the Pet Rainbow Rally was a chaotic symphony of color, fur, and good-natured mayhem. Neighbors gathered in Chastain Park, their pets adorned in every hue imaginable. Dogs sported rainbow-striped bandanas, cats wore tie-dyed sweaters, and even a few goldfish were given brightly colored gravel to liven up their bowls. Much to Karen's horror, I'm sure, Mrs. Higgins had outdone herself. She had created a color wheel of resistance, a giant spinning wheel with a rainbow of paint swatches. Participants could spin the wheel and then dress their pets in the corresponding color. It was a brilliant idea, and it added an element of spontaneity to the chaos. Bob had managed to secure a sound system, and we were blasting upbeat, colorful music, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Purple Rain, Yellow Submarine. The atmosphere was festive and defiant. I spotted Sarah, the young mother, with her children. They were all wearing rainbow-colored clothes, and their dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Sparky, was sporting a hand-painted rainbow on his fur. "This is amazing," Sarah said, beaming. "You've brought so much joy to the neighborhood." "We're just fighting for our freedom," I said, smiling, "and having a little fun along the way." Max, despite his initial reservations, seemed to be enjoying the attention. He was strutting around like he owned the place, soaking up the admiration of the crowd. He even managed a few playful bows, much to the delight of the children. As the rally gained momentum, I saw Karen approaching, her face a mask of barely suppressed rage. She was flanked by her usual Hoa minions, each armed with a clipboard and a look of disapproval. "This is a blatant violation of Article 19.2b," she declared, her voice shaking with indignation. "I demand that you cease and desist immediately." I stepped forward, Max trotting dutifully at my side. "Good morning, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So glad you could make it. I hope you're enjoying the colorful display." "This is not a display of community spirit," she retorted. "This is a deliberate attempt to undermine the authority of the Hoa. You are creating a visual blight on the neighborhood." "A visual blight?" I scoffed. "Karen, we're talking about rainbow-colored pets. It's not like we're building a nuclear power plant in the middle of Chastain Park. The Hoa is committed to maintaining a cohesive and aesthetically pleasing environment," she said, her voice rising. "And this chaos is unacceptable." "But who decides what's aesthetically pleasing?" I asked. "You, the Hoa? I think our rainbow-colored pets are beautiful. They're a symbol of our freedom, our individuality, our refusal to conform to your narrow-minded vision." The crowd erupted in applause. That's when Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, armed with her color wheel of resistance. "Karen," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Why don't you spin the wheel? Maybe a little color will do you some good. Karen recoiled in horror. I would never, she exclaimed. Then you're missing out, Mrs. Higgins said, shrugging. Color is good for the soul. It's good for the community. It's good for the dogs. She spun the wheel, and it landed on a vibrant shade of magenta. Magenta, she declared. Everyone needs more magenta in their lives. The crowd roared with laughter. Karen, realizing that she was losing control of the situation, began to sputter and stammer. I'm going to call the police, she threatened. Go ahead, Karen, I said, waving my hand dismissively. They'll probably give us a police escort. Karen glared at me, her face turning a shade of purple that I didn't think was humanly possible. Then, she did something unexpected. She burst into tears. Why are you doing this to me? She sobbed. I just want to make this neighborhood a better place. I was taken aback. I had never seen Karen show any emotion before. Karen, I said, my voice softening, we're not trying to make your life miserable. We just want to be able to live our lives without being constantly harassed by the hoe. We want to be able to express ourselves, to be creative, to have a little fun. But you're destroying everything I've worked for, she cried. No, we're not, I said. We're building something new. We're building a community where everyone feels welcome and respected. A community where pets can wear rainbow-colored tutus without fear of reprisal. Karen looked at me, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. I don't know what to do, she said. Maybe you should step down as HOA president, I suggested gently. Maybe you should let someone else take over. Someone who's more willing to listen to the residents. Karen stared at me, her mind clearly reeling. Then, she nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, she said. And with that, she turned and walked away, her Tahoe minions trailing behind her. The crowd erupted in cheers. We had won. Again, the rest of the afternoon was a blur of celebration. People were dancing, singing, and taking pictures with their rainbow-colored pets. Max was the star of the show, basking in the adoration of the crowd. As the sun began to set, I surveyed the scene with a sense of profound satisfaction. We had done it. We had stood up to Karen. We had defended our freedom. And we had created a more vibrant and joyful community. Karen eventually did step down as HOA president, replaced by a more reasonable and open-minded neighbor. The new HOA leadership repealed Article 19.2b, and the neighborhood entered a new era of peace and harmony, or at least a temporary peace. I knew that there would always be challenges and disagreements, but I also knew that we had built a strong and resilient community, one that was capable of overcoming any obstacle. As I walked home that evening, Max trotting happily at my side, I couldn't help but smile. We had fought for our freedom, and we had won. And we had done it with a little bit of color, a lot of courage, and a whole lot of ridiculous pet costumes. The end for now.